When a black bootlick has to insist a racist is wrong, then you know that that racist is Arkham certified insane. Coming to paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, 1987. Learn lessons about life and teenage love in the 1980s with this coming-of-age John Haynes story. Pre-order your copy of John Haynes, 1987 at online booksellers everywhere. I was watching Lisa Cabrera's channel where she played the clip of Don Lemon and the heated exchange that he had with so-called GOP presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. All news footage is used under fair use of United States copyright law of 1976 and is used in conjunction with my commentary.
The other, especially consider, and using the Civil War to talk about black Americans. That war was not fought for black people to have guns. That's not.
That war was fought for black people to have freedoms in this country. Yeah. Actually, that's why the Civil War was fought.
Okay.
And the sad part about it.
That wasn't fought for black people to have guns, I think.
Actually, you know, funny fact is, black people did not get to enjoy the other freedoms until their Second Amendment rights were secured. And I think that that's one of the lessons that we learned.
Still aren't allowed to enjoy the freedoms.
I disagree with you on that, Don. I disagree with you. And I think you're doing a disservice to our country by failing to recognize the fact that we have equality before the law.
And you live in this country, then you can disagree with me. But we're not. You mentioned in here that
I
we're
disagree.
Three different shades
Don,
of
I think we have to be able to
here.
talk about these issues in the open, regardless of the color of our skin. Black Americans today, to say that, compare that to 1865 and 1964,
I think for you to compare it to
absolutely
1865 and
have equal rights in
1964
this
is
country.
actually, I think it's insulting to black people. It's insulting to me as an African American. I don't want to sit here and argue with you because it's infuriating for you to put those things together. It's not right. Your telling of history is wrong.
What part of the history was wrong? What part of the history was wrong?
That the Civil War was fought. You're making people think that the Civil War was fought for black people, only for black people to get guns and for black people to have.
The Civil War was fought for black people in this country to get freedoms, a noble mission. And I think that even after we succeeded, we had to actually secure those freedoms.
To reduce it in a speech at the NRA, to say you're making people think, or you're trying to say that black people to get guns, that was the reason that you're there at the NRA. That was the reason for the Civil War.
It is a
fact.
That's
reductive.
It's not
and
reductive,
I think it's
Don.
Insulting.
And the Second Amendment was
black
part
people,
of what
hang on,
that
please.
freedom.
I cannot keep a thought if you guys are talking to me in my ear. So hang on one second. So to say that black people, say what you said again.
Black people secured their freedoms after the Civil War. It is a historical fact, Don. Just study it. Only after their Second Amendment rights were secured.
They were not secured their freedoms after the Civil War. That is not. You are discounting Reconstruction. You're discounting a whole host of things that happened after the Civil War when it comes to African Americans, including the whole reason that the Civil Rights Movement happened is because black people did not secure their freedoms after the Civil War, and that things turned around. People tried to change the freedoms that were supposed to happen.
And you know how they got it? They got their Second Amendment rights. Well, here's where you and I have a different point of view. I think we should be able to express our views regardless of the color of our skin. We should have this debate without me regarding you as a black man, but me regarding you as a fellow citizen. That's what I think we should see.
Whatever ethnicity you are, explaining to me
whatever ethnicity I am,
what it's like to be black.
Whatever ethnicity I am, I'll tell you what I am. I'm an Indian American. I'm proud of it. But I think we should have this debate. Black, white, doesn't matter.
I think we should have this
on
debate.
The content of the ideas.
If you're going to do it, you should do it in an honest way and in a fair way. And what you're doing is not an honest and fair way. Okay? But we appreciate you coming on.
With due respect, Don, I look forward to continuing that conversation.
Thank you. The conversation.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you, Papa.
We'll talk about China.
Yes, let's talk about China.
Next time you come back.
Oh, thank you. Much to say on declaring independence from China.
Okay,
something you can
move
add
on now, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, in this heated exchange between Don Lemon and this Indian so-called GOP candidate, Vivek Ramaswamy tried to be extremely smarmy as he went out here and made the claim that the Civil War was fought for black people's Second Amendment rights and that people fought the Civil War for black people to have gun rights. Now, Don Lemon is a black bootlick who looks to pander to his white paymasters, but in this case, he basically saw that this Indian was out here mangling American history and sought to correct him about the causes of the Civil War. And the whole history of the Civil War has been just warped and distorted in Vivek Ramaswamy's whole rose-colored reality, and he's presenting a whole host of facts that really do not fit the historical facts as related to the Civil War. And it takes a lot of audacity for this Indian man who knows nothing about American history, as I see it from the way he was talking about American history, to stand up in the face of a black man and tell him about his own history. That takes a whole lot of hubris and arrogance to do this, to stand in the face of a black man on the air and tell him about his own history. And Don Lemon was actually, as I see it, being extremely gracious as related to correcting him as related to his presentation of American history. Now, Vivek Ramaswamy wanted to go out here and take the white supremacist view that I'm white and I say so, and as a non-black person, he thought he had that privilege to get in the face of Don Lemon and let him know that as an Indian and a non-black, he was because he said it was so, but Don Lemon had to stand up and had to stand up for black history. And again, when you have a black bootlick standing up to you, then your facts definitely are wrong. And as someone who has studied the Civil War as related to stories I've written, like the first ISIS, I can tell you everything that Vivek Ramaswamy was presenting in his arguments was completely wrong. Now, Vivek Ramaswamy wants to say that the Civil War was fought for the freedom of black people. That was the foundation of his argument. But from my years of research on the Civil War, the foundation for the Civil War was never black people. No, it was all about the agrarian South wanting to fight against the industrial North and try to preserve what they call their way of life. Because what many of these Southerners wanted to preserve was their old Southern tradition. Unfortunately, their economy had been rendered obsolete because the South did not have the trading partners anymore, because the British were no longer trading with those Southern plantation owners because they had already carved out their own colonies in places like Vivek Ramaswamy comes from, like India. They were getting Indian cotton, they were getting African resources, and they were also conquering Asia. So there was no reason to trade for Southern cotton and Southern things like tobacco anymore. The British were basically making their own in their own colonies, and what the South was desperate to do was try to preserve their old Southern traditions and their old Southern way of life, but their own Southern traditions and way of life were becoming obsolete, and they were becoming obsolete because the Industrial Revolution was going on, and as the Industrial Revolution was going on, many people were dealing with the fact that nobody really needed an agrarian economy anymore. They were looking to build industrial platforms here in America. So the South was fighting to try to save its whole smooth world, as I call it, where they would be able to maintain their way of life, where blacks were considered to be 3/5 of a person. They could continue to maintain their large plantations, and that was not going to be possible because, again, they no longer had the trade partners with Britain, France, and Germany. These countries were out here creating their own colonies in the South, in Asia and Africa. They were out here creating their own platforms for their own trade, and the North was looking to preserve the union of the United States in the face of all of this global expansion. The main reasons for fighting the Civil War had to do with the North looking to preserve the union of the United States and the South looking to preserve its old Southern tradition. This was a war of ideals, and this was something that I learned far back as high school as related to the Civil War. And again, black people were not a major part of the foundational issues of the Civil War. And the whole plan that the North originally had was to, after they won the war, they wanted to send all of the foundational black Americans who were the descendants of slaves and the former slaves, they wanted to send us to Liberia. This was the plan by President Abraham Lincoln after he won the war, but he wound up getting assassinated before he could implement that plan to send all of those newly freed slaves to Liberia. That was the plan for all of the slaves after the Civil War. And again, it was all thwarted by that assassination by John Wilkes Booth, who was, again, another one of these individuals who wanted to preserve the old Southern tradition. And again, you have guys like Vivek Ramaswamy wanting to talk about, oh, the Civil War was fought for black people. No, black people were basically pawns in the Civil War because Abraham Lincoln used the Emancipation Proclamation as a way to galvanize insiders to go undermine and sabotage the South because the ultimate goal was preserving the Union. The ultimate goal of Abraham Lincoln and his Northern generals wasn't about fighting for the freedom of black people. No, it was all about preserving the union of the United States in the face of a changing global economy where the British were creating their empire, the French and the Dutch were creating empires in places like India and Southeast Asia and Africa. All of these people were building all sorts of colonies all across the world. And in the face of the Industrial Revolution, what Americans wanted to do was deal and dispatch of the South so that they could go out here and start creating their own colonies and empires, like as related to the Spanish-American War, and lands like the Philippines and Puerto Rico and many of the islands like Guam. This was the goal that the United States had. But Vivek Ramaswamy wants to try to tell a black man his own history and wants to tell a black man that the Civil War was fought for black people. No, the Civil War was never about black people. It was all about economics, and it was all about making sure that all of America was all on the same page as related to becoming a part of the Industrial Revolution, where it could compete against the growing British, French, Dutch, and German empires that were being built as related to colonization, because a lot of these places were colonized, and again, their goal was to try to cut up the world and get their piece of it. But you won't hear Don Lemon go even that far, because if I was on the air, I would have basically roasted this dude and let him know that it wasn't about the freedom of black people. This is something I have known ever since the 11th grade when my minority studies teacher taught me this. He took me to the side and talked to me about this, and I have been grateful for him letting me know what the real deal was about the Civil War. But we have this Indian who was not understanding anything about American history, wanting to tell Don Lemon about his own history, and we have the people at CNN who want to punish Don Lemon, who actually, for once in his life, had some backbone and stones to stand up to this clown and let him know that he is not going to tell him about his own history. Now, the other argument that this Vivek Ramaswamy wanted to get into was he wanted to go out here and try to tell Don Lemon that the Northern people were in the Civil War were fighting to make sure blacks had access to guns, and I have to call BS on that, because throughout history, these racists in the North and these racists in the South do not want any black person to ever bear arms, and it was actually against the law during slavery for any but black person, whether they be free or not, to even have a right to have a gun. I mean, they oftentimes restricted black people from having guns. Like Friedman, they would do everything in their power to try to prevent him from having a gun. The whole thing is that was one of the things that these racists do not want black people to have, because having a gun is having the power, and it also equalizes things, and that's something many of the right racists did not want to have. So they weren't fighting for black people's Second Amendment rights. Oftentimes black people had to struggle to fight to get access to guns, and if they had access to guns, again, it was a major struggle during those days in slavery. It was a major struggle during the days of Jim Crow for a black person to have a gun, because many of the white store owners would not sell black people guns, and they wouldn't even sell black people ammunition. But you won't hear that from Vivek Ramaswamy, because Vivek Ramaswamy wants to go out here and perpetuate the lie. Oh, they wanted to make sure that black people, they were fighting for Second Amendment rights. No, they were never fighting for black people's Second Amendment rights, because if that was the case, you would have seen more black people having the firepower to take on people like the Ku Klux Klan after the Reconstruction. Because after the Reconstruction, after all of those people, all of those soldiers left, many black folks were at the mercy of these Blue Party individuals who imposed Jim Crow policies to restrict black gun ownership. And even during the Reconstruction, there were efforts to restrict black people's ability to get guns. Again, people have been going to try to prevent black people from getting guns on the Blue and the Red Party, even in the days after slavery. Black people had to fight for guns, and people want to sit there and say, "Oh, there's fighting for." They were never fighting for black Second Amendment rights, and that's why we needed things like the 13th and 14th Amendments, and even then, black people's gun rights were basically, they continued to try to restrict them. And again, they wanted to restrict them because they wanted to go out here and prevent black people from having equal firepower to fight back against terrorists like the Ku Klux Klan or corrupt party politicians who would create policies to restrict their rights. This is why back in the 60s and 70s, you had Ronald Reagan going against the Black Panther Party, because they knew that if a black person had firepower, they could fight back. And this was one of the foundations of Ronald Reagan's campaigns to restrict gun rights, because the only issue they have is when a black person has gun rights, because a black person with gun rights has firepower, and that person can fight to defend their own liberty, and they have the weapon to take agency to fight to defend their own liberty. And that is one of the reasons why that there was efforts to restrict black people as related to getting guns. This is something that has been ongoing, from slavery to the Civil War to Reconstruction to Jim Crow, and even today. There are always efforts whenever black people want to get guns and firepower. This is something that many racists want to go out here and fight against, like Ronald Reagan did in the 70s. But you have Vivek Ramaswamy. This is the guy, he's living in a rose-colored reality. And as he lives in this rose-colored reality, he has come up with a delusional fantasy that even a black bootlick like Don Lemon can't buy into. And he can't buy into that reality because that reality is just insane. This Vivek Ramaswamy says he's running for president, but when I listen to this man's logic, he shows me he's Arkham certified, because only an Arkham certified individual is going to sit here and try to tell me that the Civil War was fought for black people's freedom, which is lie number one. He's going to tell me that they were fighting for black people's Second Amendment rights, when during that time, every Southern politician and Northern politician was fighting against black people owning guns. And these are historically documented facts, but this individual is so insane, He's living in his own reality, and he's creating his own completely distorted facts as related to the subject. And if this is an individual who says he's running for president, I would have to say that if anybody votes for this individual, they have to be Arkham certified insane. Because if you have a presidential candidate going out here and cannot understand the basic facts of American history, then this individual disqualifies themselves from contention as a candidate, because only a completely insane person is going to sit there and dispute known facts as related to the Civil War. And if you don't understand American history, then you don't qualify to be a presidential candidate, because if a black bootlick is going out here and refuting many of your talking points with basic logic, if there was a debate, this guy would get torpedoed and basically destroyed, because I would think even Donald Trump would go out here and cook and roast this guy for his just misrepresentations and just outright lies as related to American history, because these are just outright lies as related to American history. Because again, Civil War was never fought about black people. Black people were a part of the discussion, and a small part at that. Again, it was all about economics and competing in the global marketplace against other countries who had built colonies, and it was all about competing and getting a cut of the world's third world, and it was all also about going out here and being able to go out here and fight to maintain a union so that the U.S. would be competitive. So these are things that Vivek Ramaswamy, who says he's a presidential candidate, says that this is history, but shows me how this racist, again, just completely distorts the facts. And because he believes he's gotten special white privilege from white supremacy, he was white and he said so. And it took Don Lemon, the black bootlick, to check him. And as he was checking him, he was being told by his producers to stop, but he could not stop, because even a black bootlick has a semblance of dignity to say, hey, this is just completely insane. And if you've got a guy presenting just an insane statement, you have to call it the crazy it actually is. And this Vivek Ramaswamy, what's insane is you've got white supremacy making him believe that he can run for president, making these insane talking points, when 100 or 200 years before, if you made these talking points, they would be putting you in a straitjacket and locking you up for lunacy, because only a lunatic is going to sit here and make these kind of statements when there are historical facts that basically disprove them. And what's even more insane is that CNN took some sources, fired Don Lemon, and they fired him, they said, basic on this statement. But I believe the plans to fire Don Lemon were way before this, because what CNN is looking to do is looking to pivot as related to its narratives, and it's looking to pivot as related to its narratives in order to go out here and make themselves appear to be center-right, so that they can appeal to that dwindling audience of viewers for the 2024 election cycle. So while this argument between Vivek Ramaswamy and Don Lemon might have been another reason to terminate Don Lemon's contract, I believe that it basically shows how both the left and the right are certifiable, because only a certifiable insane person is going to let somebody like Vivek Ramaswamy come on the air. And if people support this man, I have to wonder who's more crazy, Vivek Ramaswamy, who basically has no understanding of American history, or the Arkham certified individuals who would vote for this individual, because this individual clearly shows me they're so racist, they have no grasp of reality, And the barometer of how insane this person is that the fact that you've got a black bootlick sitting there telling them that they are wrong, because usually a black bootlick will go along to get along. And if your statements are just this insane that a bootlick is pushing back against them, then it shows that this individual needs to be in a straitjacket. And it really shows a very troubling reflection of our times, that you've got a completely insane person making statements and not many Americans pushing back. And it's really sad that you've got a black bootlick that has to push back on basic facts, because any guy like myself back in 1992, I was about 17, 18 years old. When I was in my minority studies class, I learned all about black history, and I learned about the truth of the Civil War. And after learning about the truth of the Civil War from my minority studies teacher, that I could look at this guy's statements and I could have cooked and roasted this dude, because his facts just don't match history, and his facts don't match history as related to black people owning guns, because white supremacy has always pushed back against black people owning guns, black people's Second Amendment rights. This is something that has always been done, but he's going to sit there and say that they were fighting for that. No, when it came down to it, black people were dealing with the North looking to make them second-class citizens, just like the South. And again, it's a sad state of affairs when you have Don Lemon going out here and standing up for black people, because when the bootlick is telling you things are wrong, that shows how completely insane things have gotten as related to the state of our union. Now, if you want to pick up some of my positive black fiction on the SJS Direct imprint, or my nonfiction like The Man Crisis, you can find those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find those books at other online booksellers like Smashwords, the iBookstore, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, and Target. And if you want to see me make more videos like this, you can send a donation to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available for free on Google Play and Smashwords. The Retreat by Lawrence Cherry. If you want to advance in your faith in God, sometimes you have to retreat. Get The Retreat for free on Smashwords and Google Play today. Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, Godbreaker. The man who rules the world takes on the Asgardian god of thunder in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get your copy of John Haynes, Godbreaker in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere.